The storm had rolled in without warning that night, sweeping over the plains with a wind that whistled through the cracks in the windows of Harlan Cole's farmhouse. Snow fell thick, blanketing the world outside in a silence that felt endless. Harlan sat alone at the kitchen table, eating reheated stew from the night before. The clock ticked softly above the stove. Each tick felt louder in the emptiness of the house. Since his wife Margaret had passed 2 winters ago, every sound echoed a little longer. He had gotten used to the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort but gnaws. He often left the radio on just to feel another voice in the room. But tonight, the wind had knocked out the signal. Only the crackling of the fire in the old cast-iron stove kept him company. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the empty chair across from him, the one she used to sit in, knitting while he talked about his day on the ambulance. Then came the sound. A knock. So faint, he thought at first it was the wood settling. But then it came again. 3 uneven taps on the back door. Harlan frowned. Nobody came out here this late. His nearest neighbor was nearly half a mile away. He set his spoon down, the metallic clink sharp in the stillness. Another knock, weaker this time. He grabbed the flashlight from the counter and walked toward the back porch. The old boards creaked under his boots. He hesitated at the door. "Hello?" he called, his breath fogging in the cold. No answer. He opened the door halfway, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. That's when he saw it. A figure stood in the drift, small and trembling, its skin a strange shade of gray. Not gray like frostbite, gray like ash, faintly luminescent under the falling snow. Its limbs were too thin, too long. The eyes were the worst part, huge, black, and reflecting the light like wet glass. Harlan's first instinct was to slam the door. Every nerve in his body screamed to shut it out, whatever it was. But something in the way it stood there, weak, shivering, holding its hands close to its chest, stopped him. It didn't feel threatening. It looked hungry. "Good Lord," he muttered under his breath. "What in the hell are you?" It made a faint sound, almost like a breath that didn't quite reach words. Its legs buckled slightly, and it collapsed into the snow. That did it. Training took over before fear could stop him. Years as a paramedic kicked in. He stepped forward, hooked his arms under the creature's shoulders, and half dragged, half carried it inside. It was lighter than it should have been, almost weightless, as if hollow. Inside, he set it near the fire. Its skin was cold, but not like ice. Colder, smoother, almost metallic. The thing's chest rose and fell faintly. It was alive, barely. Harlan's pulse raced. "You better not die on me," he whispered. He pulled a blanket over it and stoked the fire higher. The creature twitched at the sound, its long fingers curling. Then it opened its eyes again. They were darker than the deepest night, but within them shimmered faint ripples, like distant galaxies moving behind glass. He stared, frozen, unable to look away. "You're not human," he said softly. The creature blinked once, slow, deliberate. Its gaze moved to the plate of stew still sitting on the table. "You hungry?" Harlan asked, his voice catching somewhere between fear and pity. "You understand that?" It tilted its head slightly, like an animal hearing its name. Then it nodded, slow, uncertain, but unmistakable. Something broke in him then, some wall between disbelief and compassion. He poured the rest of his stew into a clean bowl and set it in front of the creature. "Go on," he said, gesturing awkwardly. "Eat." The being reached out with trembling hands. The fingers were long, each tipped not with nails, but faintly glowing ridges. It picked up the spoon, awkwardly at first, then mimicked his motions. Slowly, carefully, it began to eat. For a long while, the only sound was the gentle scrape of the spoon and the fire's hiss. Harlan sat opposite it, every rational thought in his mind tearing at the seams. He wanted to grab his phone, call someone, anyone, but who would believe him? He barely believed it himself. Then, as the being lifted its gaze, he felt it. Not a voice, not a sound, but a presence inside his head. "Thank you." Harlan jerked slightly. "What?" "Thank you," the voice repeated, clearer now, like an echo that knew his language better than his own thoughts. "For helping me. I was dying." He looked around as if expecting to see someone else in the room. You talking to me?" The being nodded. "Yes, I speak through what you call thought. My body cannot form your sounds." Harlan swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he should pray or run. I don't understand." "You will." The being glanced at the fire, its dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Your kindness has consequences, Harlan Cole." His name. It said his name. Every hair on his arms stood on end. "How do you?" "Because I remember you," it said simply. "Long before this life. Long before this night." The words struck something deep in him, something older than memory. He didn't even notice that tears had welled in his eyes. "You remember me?" "Yes." "But before we continue, you must listen carefully." The voice deepened, taking on a resonance that filled the entire room. The lights flickered. The fire dimmed. What you're about to hear has been hidden from humanity for thousands of years. The air felt charged, humming faintly. And I must warn you, once you understand this truth, your entire view of reality will shatter. This isn't comfort. This will challenge everything the church, the government, and your own mind told you was real. But if you are tired of the lies, if you are ready to see what is truly happening, you need to subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because the story you are about to witness will expose a truth that powerful people don't want you to know. There's no going back after this. The voice faded, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the sound of the storm outside. Harlan sat frozen, his breath visible in the cold air. The being turned back toward him. "I came for something more than food. I came to remind you what waits after death." Harlan tried to speak, but no words came. "Your world has forgotten. You call it heaven, but it is not a place. It is a pattern. Energy that never dies, only shifts. You've seen it before, every time someone you loved passed, and you felt them in the room after they were gone. That warmth, that presence, that's not memory, that's them still existing." Harlan stared, shaking his head slowly. "You're saying the afterlife's real?" The being looked at him, its expression unreadable. "More real than this room, but humans see only in shadows. I will show you light." It set down the spoon carefully and reached a hand toward the fire. The flames rose higher as if obeying. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes, faces, fleeting and beautiful. Harlan gasped. One of them looked like Margaret. The being whispered, its thought barely more than a tremor in his mind. "You gave me food, Harlan Cole. Now I will give you truth." And as the storm outside swallowed the night, the fire flared brighter, spilling strange light across the room, light that pulsed like a heartbeat from another world. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound in the house was the crackle of the fire, the storm pressing its frozen fingers against the windows, and Harlan's own pulse thudding in his ears. The air felt thick, charged, alive in some impossible way. He tried to make sense of what had just happened. He'd heard no words, yet something deep within him understood. The message had arrived like memory, not sound. Familiar. Personal. He took a shaky breath. You can talk. Inside my head. The creature, no, the being, lifted its gaze from the fire. The glow of the flames shimmered in those vast black eyes, reflecting back 1,000 tiny embers. And then it came again, the soft wave of feeling, gratitude, warmth, and beneath it, a sorrow so profound it nearly brought Harlan to tears. Thank you. It wasn't sound. It wasn't thought. It was like being touched by meaning itself. Harlan rubbed a hand over his face. You can hear me too, can't you? The being nodded. Its movements were graceful, deliberate, as if gravity held less power over it. What are you? The answer came slow, heavy with weight. My name is Elion. The name rolled through his consciousness like a whisper carried by wind. Elion. It felt ancient, familiar, as though he'd heard it once long ago in a dream. Elion, he repeated quietly. Where did you come from? For a few seconds there was no reply. Then the being's head tilted toward the frost-streaked window, as though listening to something far beyond the house, from beyond the last breath of light. Harlan frowned. That's not a place. No, Elion agreed gently. It's not. Something in the way it said those words made his skin prickle. There was a depth to them, a weight that pulled at his thoughts like a tide. He wanted to ask more, but his mouth had gone dry. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand trembling, and sat back down. Elion studied him. You have spent your life saving others from death, it said, each thought settling in his mind like falling snow. But once, you saved a man who was not meant to live. That is why I am here. Harlan blinked. What do you mean, not meant to live? The being's expression didn't change, yet the room seemed to darken, the air turning colder. 2 winters ago. A wreck on the highway. A man pinned in a truck beneath the snow. Harlan froze. He remembered that night vividly. The overturned semi, the snowstorm, the call that came just before midnight. He'd been first on the scene. The driver's pulse had stopped twice, but somehow, against every medical odd, he'd brought him back. The man survived. You're saying that man? His cycle was complete. His energy was meant to return. You changed that path, and so, the balance shifted. That doesn't make any sense, Harlan whispered. You're saying I cheated death, and that's... what? A problem? Elion didn't answer right away. It glanced toward the fire, then back at him. In your world, you think of death as an ending. It isn't. It is exchange, flow. When the flow is interrupted, something must be restored. Harlan's stomach turned cold. And you're here to restore it? The being's eyes softened. Not in the way you think. I am not here to punish. I am here to remind. Remind me of what? Of what you are, and what waits after you stop pretending to be human. Harlan's heart hammered. Pretending? Yes. Elion leaned slightly forward, its gray skin shimmering faintly in the firelight. Every soul wears a mask to enter this world. You call it flesh. You call it identity. But when you die, the mask falls away, and what remains is what you have always been. He shook his head. I don't understand. If there's something after death, why doesn't anyone remember it? The being's answer carried no judgment, only sadness, because remembering would end the lesson. You come here to forget, to rediscover, over and over again. But something has gone wrong. The remembering has been stolen from you. Stolen? By those who profit from fear. The words sank into him like stones. He wanted to argue, to demand proof, but the sincerity in Elion's presence disarmed him. He'd spent decades hearing the dying speak of lights, voices, warmth before their final breath. He'd seen peace fall across faces moments before the monitor went flat. It wasn't random. It had always meant something. You said your ship crashed. Where is it? Elion's eyes shifted toward the window again, as if it could see through the walls. 1/2 mile beyond the old irrigation ditch, hidden beneath the snow. I cannot repair it. My time in this form is nearly over. Harlan frowned. You mean you're dying? Fading, the being corrected softly. This body cannot survive long in your density. Before I go, you must hear what has been kept from your kind, because the silence around death has cost you everything. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the windows. It felt as though the entire night leaned closer to listen. What exactly have we been kept from knowing? Harlan asked, his voice breaking slightly. Elion turned its gaze back to him. That there is no death. Harlan let out a small, humorless laugh. I've watched plenty of people die, friend. I've seen bodies go cold. You saw bodies, Elion replied, not beings. What departs cannot be measured by heartbeat or brainwave. It is light, pure awareness. You cannot lose what was never separate. That sounds like something a preacher would say. Then perhaps your preachers once knew the truth before they forgot it too. The being's form flickered faintly, its edges shimmering like heat over asphalt. Harlan noticed how weak it looked now, how shallow its breathing had become. Can I help you? You said you're starving. The food you gave sustains the body, not the essence. I am nourished by exchange, truth shared, understanding received. That is why I came to you, because you have touched both sides of life more than most. You have watched it arrive screaming, and you have watched it leave in silence. You are a bridge between worlds, even if you've forgotten. The words hit deep. Memories surged, dozens of faces, some gone within minutes, others clinging to life until their final breath. He'd always thought of his work as duty. He'd never considered it purpose. I don't know what you expect from me, he said quietly. I'm no prophet. I'm just a man who couldn't save the one person who mattered. Elion's eyes glowed faintly brighter. You did save her. Harlan's throat tightened. Don't, he whispered. Don't talk about Margaret. You think she's gone. She isn't. She is waiting. They all are. What waits after death is not judgment, but reunion. The problem is that humanity no longer believes reunion is possible. That is what was taken from you. That is why I came. Something inside Harlan broke then. Not from fear, but from longing. Every sleepless night, every prayer that went unanswered, every whisper into the empty air beside his bed came flooding back. He leaned forward, voice trembling. Then show me where she is. Elion's expression softened like a parent comforting a frightened child. I will, but first, you must understand the cost of seeing. The fire guttered suddenly, the shadows lengthening along the walls. The warmth drained from the room, replaced by a hum that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Harlan gripped the edge of the table. What's happening? Elion rose to its feet with slow, graceful movement, the blanket falling away from its shoulders. The veil between your world and the one beyond it is thinner than you think. Tonight, you will see what every soul remembers the moment after its last breath. The lights flickered, and a low vibration filled the air, rising in pitch until it became almost musical. Do not be afraid, the being whispered into his mind. You once saved life where death was meant to be. Now you will see what life truly is." Harlan's heart pounded. The edges of the room began to blur, the walls bending as if reality itself were breathing. He clung to the table, terrified yet unable to look away as the light around Elyon grew brighter, silver and gold merging into something that felt alive. And then the farmhouse was gone. Only the light remained. The light around them softened, melting the edges of the room into something dreamlike. The kitchen seemed to breathe, as if the walls themselves remembered something ancient. The storm outside faded to a dull whisper, and the clock above the stove stopped ticking. Harlan realized he was still holding his half-empty bowl, steam rising between him and the being seated across from him. Elyon watched him with the stillness of a reflection in water. Every flicker of the firelight danced in its dark eyes, creating tiny galaxies that shimmered and vanished. The smell of stew, the creak of the chair, the hum of the stove, all of it felt heavier now, sacred somehow, as though the ordinary had turned holy. The being leaned slightly forward, hands folded in a strangely human way. "You share food as if it's ritual," it said softly, its voice rippling through his mind like ripples in a pond. "But you forget what ritual truly means. You break bread to remember connection, yet you live believing you are alone." Harlan looked down at the spoon in his hand. "It's just dinner," he said quietly. Elyon tilted its head. "To you, maybe, but to me every act of nourishment is a prayer. Even your fire is prayer. You feed light to warmth. You feed yourself to continuation. The universe listens not to words, Harlan, but to vibration." Harlan frowned, trying to ground himself in logic. "You mean energy?" "Energy, frequency, emotion. Call it what you like. Your prayers are not what you say. They are what you feel while saying it." That cut deeper than he expected. "So all those years I prayed after Margaret died, none of it mattered?" The being's gaze softened. "It mattered. But you were speaking upward when you should have been speaking inward. You thought heaven was above you, when it was always within." Harlan stared into the fire, jaw tightening. "You don't understand. I used to believe. I used to think prayer could save people. But after what I've seen..." He trailed off, shaking his head. Too many faces. Too many people begging for help in those final seconds. You know what they all said before they went? They said they were afraid. Every one of them. I watched people die believing they weren't good enough to be saved. The words came out harsher than he intended. The pain he'd buried for years had clawed its way up through his voice. Elyon didn't flinch. "That fear is what keeps your species asleep," it said softly. "Fear of ending, fear of being judged, fear of losing what was never yours to lose. But I came to end that fear, Harlan Cole." Harlan laughed bitterly. "And how do you plan to do that?" Elyon turned its palms upward. For a moment, the air around its hands shimmered, faint threads of light weaving between its fingers. "By showing you what comes next." The room dimmed. The fire's glow bent toward Elyon as though drawn by unseen gravity. Harlan's stomach tightened. "What are you doing? You wanted to know what waits after death. So I will show you the continuum." Before he could protest, the world began to dissolve. The smell of smoke and stew faded. The floor under his boots vanished, replaced by a boundless expanse of pale light that stretched infinitely in every direction. Harlan gasped, clutching the edge of the table. But there was no table anymore. He was floating, yet anchored. There was no sense of falling or weight, only presence. Beside him, Elyon hovered effortlessly, the faint glow of its body merging with the endless horizon. "Do not be afraid," it said, though the reassurance arrived like thought instead of sound. "You are not outside of your world. You are simply seeing it without boundaries." Below them, or perhaps within them, swirled streams of radiant color, rivers of light flowing in vast loops that curved and joined and divided like living veins. Each current pulsed with rhythm, like a heartbeat made of stars. Harlan stared in awe. What is this?" "The continuum," Elian answered. "The field of consciousness. Every soul that ever was, is, or will be moves through here. You are seeing what your religions tried to describe, but language was too small for it." He felt tears blur his vision. "Souls? Yes. Each light you see is awareness, some resting, some learning, some preparing to return. There is no judgment here, no heaven or hell, only motion, only becoming." He squinted at the luminous rivers. Some flowed brightly, alive with gold and white, while others glowed faintly, almost dim. "What about those, the dim ones?" Elian's expression carried a quiet sadness. "Those are the ones who forgot completely. They cling to fear, to guilt, to identity. They are not punished, only lost within themselves until remembrance returns. Every being finds its way back eventually." Harlan's voice cracked. "Is Margaret here?" "Every love you've ever given exists here," the being said gently. "Love cannot end. It only changes density. When you miss her, it is because your vibration is searching for hers." He swallowed hard. "Then why can't I feel her? Because your grief is louder than your listening." The words pierced him. He wanted to argue, but his throat closed. He had spent nights talking to her picture, begging for signs, waiting for dreams that never came. Maybe she had been there all along, drowned out by his pain. He turned to Elian. "You said this is what comes after death. Why don't we remember it when we're born?" The being looked upward, or maybe inward. "Because forgetting is necessary for growth. If you carried all memory, you would never take risks, never choose, never love freely. Forgetting allows rediscovery, and rediscovery is creation." Harlan gazed again at the swirling lights. One stream brushed close to him, filling him with warmth so pure it made him cry. Within that light, for just a second, he felt Margaret's laughter, the echo of her hand in his. He whispered, "I remember that sound." Elian's glow pulsed gently. "She remembers you too. You think you loved her only once, but you have met across many worlds, in many forms. Love never ends. It simply rearranges its face." The river of light drifted away, fading into the endless horizon. Harlan reached after it, but his hand passed through the air like mist. "I don't want to leave her again." "You can't lose what is within you," Elian said. "You carry fragments of her in every cell, every breath. When you die, you do not go somewhere else. You simply open your eyes wider." The expanse shimmered, and suddenly the farmhouse walls returned around them. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, the clock began ticking again. Harlan blinked hard, gripping the edge of the table as though the world might vanish again if he let go. His heart raced. "That was real?" Elian nodded slowly. "As real as this. Both are the same substance viewed through different veils. You call this life and that death, but they are one current flowing through two mirrors." Harlan sat back, breathing hard. The bowl of stew was still half full between them, steam curling upward like memory. He let out a shaky laugh. "I must be losing my mind." "No," Elian said, "you are finding it." He looked into those dark eyes, and for the first time since Margaret's passing, he didn't feel hollow. He felt seen, understood. Elian placed one hand on the table. Every act of kindness echoes through the continuum. When you saved that man on the highway, the ripple reached farther than you know. You kept a life in motion that was meant to end, and in doing so, you pulled me here to remind you what you are capable of. Harlan swallowed the lump in his throat. Why me? Because only those who have walked beside death can recognize the truth when it knocks at their door. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Elian's skin shimmered softly, the glow returning to its body. This meal will be remembered beyond this night, it said. It is the first time in your history that a human and one of my kind have shared not food, but understanding. Harlan looked at the spoon still in his hand, then at the being before him. And what happens now? Elian's gaze drifted toward the window, where the snow still fell in heavy silence. Now, it whispered, you learn why your species fears the light. The fire dimmed again, and outside, the storm seemed to pause, as if the night itself was listening. The glow deepened until it swallowed the world. The fire, the table, the walls. Everything dissolved into brilliance so vast that Harlan couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. He felt no body, no breath, only the faint awareness of existing. A soft current moved through him, as if he were drifting through the pulse of something living. Elian, he whispered, or thought he did. His voice was gone, replaced by pure intention. Where are we? You are within the continuum, the being replied, though its voice didn't sound external. It bloomed directly inside his consciousness, calm and resonant. The field where all consciousness flows. You are not apart from it. You never were. But now, you are seeing it without the filter of form. Harlan looked, or rather, felt himself look, downward. Beneath him spread an endless expanse of light, not flat, but flowing like a river made of stars. Billions of luminous threads intertwined, each pulsing with its own rhythm, merging and diverging, weaving a tapestry of motion that felt both infinite and intimate. Every current carried something unique, emotion, memory, awareness, streaming toward a single radiant source that pulsed in the distance like the heart of creation. It was overwhelming and achingly beautiful. Every color shimmered beyond the spectrum he knew. Living golds that sang, blues that hummed with compassion, silvers that vibrated like whispered truth. Each pulse seemed to say, you are part of this. He felt Elian beside him, not as a shape, but as a harmonic note within the same song. What are these? Harlan asked. Souls? Yes, Elian said, fragments of source, experiencing themselves, each one learning through existence, merging into one another, dividing again to grow. What you call death is only migration. A soul does not vanish. It transitions between densities, shedding the layers that made it heavy enough to forget. The word forget lingered in his thoughts like a shadow over sunlight. Forget what? That it is eternal, Elian answered, that it was never separate from the whole. As Harlan drifted above the rivers, something glimmered at the edge of his awareness, a familiar pulse, warm and golden, moving through the currents below. It called to him not through words, but through the deep ache of recognition. He felt it before he saw it. And then she appeared. Margaret, not as flesh and bone, but as light, soft, golden, unmistakably her. He didn't see her face so much as feel it, the way she used to laugh quietly before saying his name, the way her hands smelled faintly of lavender soap. Her glow was gentle but sure, radiating love so absolute it hurt to look at. Margaret, he whispered, and his awareness trembled. Her light moved closer, and though no mouth spoke, he heard her. "You finally stopped praying to the sky, Harlan." He almost laughed through the tears forming in whatever part of him could still cry. "I thought I lost you." "You can't lose what you are made of," she said tenderly. "You only forget to see it." He reached for her, desperate to hold her one more time, but his hands, if they existed, passed through her light like mist. The contact wasn't physical. It was deeper. Her warmth filled him, spilling through his awareness until he couldn't tell where she ended and he began. In that instant, all the years of loneliness collapsed. The nights spent whispering into the dark, the guilt of surviving her, the empty prayers, all of it melted away. There was no distance between them, only recognition. Then, just as quickly, she began to drift backward, her light folding back into the greater current. "Wait!" he called. "Don't go!" "You are not ready to stay," her voice echoed softly, "but you will remember now." And with that, she was gone, rejoined to the endless rivers below. Harlan turned to Elion, grief and wonder clashing inside him. "She was real. I felt her." "She is real," Elion said. "More real than this form you inhabit. What you call life is the shadow. This, the being gestured toward the radiant expanse, is the source of light that casts it." Harlan tried to understand, but language failed him. "Then why can't we stay here? Why do we have to forget?" "Because remembrance without experience is stagnation. The soul must forget to rediscover, to expand its understanding of itself. You enter physical worlds to learn love through limits. Pain teaches depth. Separation teaches yearning. And when the lesson is complete, you return here, shedding the density of what you were." Harlan's awareness trembled. "And judgment? Heaven? Hell?" "Illusions," Elion said simply. "No soul is judged. No soul is lost. You judge yourselves through misunderstanding. There is only alignment and misalignment, vibration close to source or far from it. Fear pulls you away. Love returns you home." The being extended its hand, though in this place, hands were symbols, not limbs, and Harlan saw within it countless human faces, flickering like reflections on water. Some he recognized, patients he'd held as they slipped away. Their light moved gently, peacefully, each one returning to the river. "I thought they were gone," he murmured. "You thought wrong," Elion said. "You call death an ending because you cannot see beyond the veil of perception. But look closely. The rivers below glowed brighter. Each strand began to hum, their frequencies merging into a single, harmonious vibration. It wasn't chaotic. It was music, symphonic, alive. Every life, every death, every joy and sorrow formed part of one perfect chord. Elion's voice merged with the resonance. You see? There is no separation between what dies and what is born. It is all the same current moving through new patterns. Harlan felt himself dissolving into the song, becoming light within light, memory within memory. He saw fragments of his own life, the child he once was, the man holding Margaret's hand as she faded, the countless strangers he had saved on the roadside. He saw their lights connecting to his, looping endlessly through the same melody. He wanted to stay. He wanted to surrender completely to the rhythm, to become part of that unbroken river. But Elion's voice anchored him gently. "Not yet, Harlan Cole. You still have a breath left in the world of form, and there is something you must remember for them." "For who?" he asked. "For those who still believe faith is obedience instead of memory." The brightness around them began to contract, folding in on itself like fabric being gathered. The vast expanse dimmed into a single sphere of light, glowing at the center of Elion's being. "Faith was never meant to blind you," the voice continued softly. It was meant to remind you, to remember the truth even when you are dreaming of darkness. The light swirled faster, wrapping around Harlan like a cocoon. The sound of the continuum faded into a low hum, then into silence. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the kitchen returned. The fire was still burning, but the air shimmered faintly with leftover light. The clock ticked once, twice, and resumed its steady rhythm. Harlan slumped forward onto the table, trembling. His face was wet with tears he hadn't realized were falling. The bowl in front of him had gone cold. Elian sat across from him again, its glow dimmed but its eyes luminous with compassion. Harlan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "That was real," he whispered. "I saw her. I felt her." Elian nodded. "You remembered. That is all it ever takes." He looked up slowly, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "And when I die, you will wake again in the river of light, and this world will seem like a dream you once believed too deeply." Harlan's voice broke as he whispered, "Then faith, it's not belief." "No," Elian said gently. "Faith is memory." The being reached across the table, its hand hovering just above his. "And you, Harlan Cole, have just remembered what most of your world has forgotten." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm began to ease, leaving only the slow, rhythmic drip of melting snow from the roof, like the pulse of a world still half asleep, waiting to awaken. The wind outside had calmed to a whisper, brushing against the windows like breath against glass. The world beyond the farmhouse lay wrapped in silence and snow, untouched, as if holding its own breath. Inside, Harlan sat with his elbows on the table, staring into the fire, his mind still tangled in the brilliance he had just seen. He couldn't shake the image of Margaret's light, the feeling of being everywhere and nowhere at once. It had felt truer than anything his eyes had ever shown him. And yet, part of him resisted. Decades of sermons, scripture, and habit still echoed in the back of his mind. He turned to Elian, whose glow had dimmed to something soft and steady, like moonlight on river water. "If what you showed me is true," Harlan said quietly, "then what was all that for? The crosses, the churches, the sacrifices, the promises of heaven and the fear of hell. What was the point of any of it?" Elian watched the fire as if searching for the right frequency of light before answering. When it finally spoke, its voice was low and ancient. "The stories you were given were not lies, Harlan. They were translations, echoes of a truth too vast for words. Then tell me the real one." The being's dark eyes flickered with faint reflection. "Long before the crucifixion, before the first kingdom or the first priest, my kind walked among you. We came when humanity was still learning to name the stars. We did not rule. We whispered. We taught your ancestors how to listen, to the earth, to the heavens, to the silence within. We showed them that the spark of creation lived in every being." Harlan felt his skin prickle. "You're saying there were others like you?" Elian nodded. "Yes, not gods, not angels, but travelers of awareness. Each of us carried fragments of what you might call divine memory. But there was one among us who chose something far greater. The air seemed to hum faintly. He decided to descend fully, not to appear in glory, but to become matter, to feel hunger, pain, love, loss, to live and die as one of you." Harlan stared. "You mean—" "Yes," Elian said. "The one you call Jesus. The man who remembered completely what every human forgets. He became a bridge between the infinite and the finite." Harlan's throat tightened. "So you're telling me Jesus was one of you?" Elian turned its gaze to him, and the silence between them deepened. He was more. He was what we all are when remembrance is perfect. He was not worshiping God. He was being God remembering itself through human eyes. Harlan leaned back, shaking his head slowly. You can't just say that like it's nothing. You're saying he wasn't sent by God. He was God. Your words divide what cannot be divided, Elion replied. The source is not somewhere else. It is the field that breathes you into being every moment. The man you call the Christ was not performing miracles. He was restoring memory. He was showing your world what it looks like when a soul lives without forgetting what it truly is. Harlan's hands trembled slightly. He poured himself a cup of coffee just to do something with them, though it tasted bitter and burnt. Then what about the sacrifice, the suffering, the crucifixion? What was that for? Elion's light dimmed again, as if remembering something painful. He did not die to erase your sins, Harlan. He died to prove that death was not real. His body's end was meant to show that awareness cannot be destroyed. That was the teaching. But when fear took hold of your kind, that truth was twisted. Twisted? Yes. The message of liberation became a weapon of control. Kings and priests saw that fear was power. So they turned the story of awakening into a doctrine of obedience. They taught that only through worship could you find what was already inside you. They built empires on the promise of salvation while chaining the very soul they claimed to free. Harlan felt his stomach sink. You're saying religion was a cover-up? Not at first, Elion said softly. It began as remembrance, but memory fades when power grows. The early ones, the ones who followed him in truth, knew what he meant. They understood that the kingdom of heaven was not a place to reach, but a state to return to. But centuries passed, and fear became the language of faith. You began to kneel when you were meant to stand, to beg when you were meant to remember. The fire cracked sharply, sending sparks up the chimney. Harlan stared into it, his pulse racing. The words scraped against everything he had been raised to believe, yet somewhere deep inside, they rang true. He thought of the times he'd prayed not out of love but out of desperation, begging for miracles, bargaining with silence. He thought of Margaret, her hand cold in his, her lips whispering a prayer as she faded, a prayer she was too afraid not to say. He had always wondered why peace had come after her last breath instead of before it. If what you're saying is true, he said hoarsely, then we've been lied to for thousands of years. Elion regarded him quietly, not lied to, just misled by fear. Even those who built the lies believed them in time. Fear spreads like fire. It consumes truth until all that's left is smoke. But under the smoke, the flame still burns. Harlan rubbed his temples. So what happens to all of it now? The churches, the prayers, the people who still believe? Belief is not the enemy, Elion said. It is the doorway, but a doorway must be walked through. Faith was never meant to trap you in hope. It was meant to awaken you into knowing. The true prayer is not, save me, but remind me. The phrase hit him like a heartbeat. Remind me. He whispered it under his breath, and the words felt different, alive, as though they carried a pulse of their own. Elion reached out, its hand hovering above the table, palm open. When the one you called Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he did not speak in metaphor. He was describing the state of complete remembrance. He came to show your kind that the kingdom of heaven is not promised. It is remembered. Harlan's eyes burned. Then why did he let himself die? Because he knew death would be your greatest illusion. By embracing it, he showed that there was nothing to fear. The body perished, but consciousness did not. That moment, his final breath, was the great unveiling. But instead of seeing freedom, your ancestors saw only sacrifice. They turned the key into a chain. The clock on the wall ticked softly in the heavy silence that followed. Harlan stared at the fire, struggling to find words. So, the church, the rituals, it's all built on a misunderstanding? A memory half remembered, Elian said, but even distortion carries fragments of truth. When you light a candle, when you sing, when you break bread together, those acts still echo the original message. The spark is never lost, it only sleeps. Harlan leaned forward, his voice breaking. Then tell me what I'm supposed to do with this. I can't unhear it. Elian's gaze softened. You were never meant to keep it hidden. The message must return to the world, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. Tell them, the divine was never meant to be worshipped. It was meant to be lived. For a long while, Harlan said nothing. The fire had burned low, the last embers glowing like red eyes beneath the ash. His breath fogged faintly in the cooling air. Elian's voice drifted into his thoughts one last time that night. The cross was not meant to symbolize suffering, Harlan Cole. It was a map, the intersection between the infinite and the finite, between above and below, spirit and flesh. Where the two meet, life begins again. He sat back, silent, watching as the final ember cracked and fell into darkness. Somewhere in that fading light, something inside him shifted, a tremor between faith and memory, fear and truth. He didn't know which world he belonged to anymore, but for the first time, he realized that maybe the question had never mattered. The night deepened until it felt as if the world itself were holding its breath. Snow hammered against the windows, 1,000 small fists pounding on the glass. The fire in the stove snapped and hissed, struggling to stay alive beneath the draft that leaked through the seams of the old farmhouse. Harlan rose and threw another log into the flames, but the wood was damp, and the fire only coughed smoke in protest. The air had grown colder, thicker, as though the house was slowly sinking into another world. When he turned back, Elian was sitting slumped in the chair by the table, its once luminous skin dimmed to the dull gray of fading embers. The soft radiance that had filled the room earlier now flickered faintly around it, like the last light of a dying candle. Its chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath a struggle. Harlan felt panic creep up his spine. "You're fading," he said, moving closer. Elian's eyes lifted toward him, their glow weak but steady. The vessel can no longer contain the frequency of this world. The voice murmured in his mind, "My time here is ending." "Then let me help," Harlan insisted. "Tell me what to do. Food, heat, something." Elian shook its head. "The body is not what needs saving. The message is." Harlan's throat tightened. "Don't talk like that. You can't leave now. Not after all this." "I was never meant to stay," Elian said gently. "My mission was only to remind, and the reminder is almost complete. But I need your help for one final act." Harlan sank into the chair across from it. "Anything," he whispered. "Look into my eyes," Elian said. "Truly look. See yourself there." The words felt simple, but something in the tone made Harlan hesitate. There was weight in them, a gravity he could feel in his bones. He leaned forward, meeting Elian's gaze. Those vast black eyes shimmered faintly with inner light, and as he stared into them, the world around him began to unravel. At first, he saw only his reflection, his own face, weary and weathered, framed by the orange glow of the fire. But then the reflection rippled, distorting like water stirred by unseen wind. He gasped as the image multiplied, fragments of himself splitting into countless faces, old, young, male, female, each wearing expressions that weren't his own. Then the faces blurred, giving way to scenes that flowed like dreams bleeding into one another. He saw a woman cradling a newborn under the pale light of a distant star, a soldier kneeling in a field of bodies, whispering forgiveness before the end, a teacher lighting a lamp for her students in a cave while thunder shook the mountains above, a child reaching into the dirt to rescue a wounded bird. Every life burned through him in flashes, births, deaths, laughter, fear, sacrifice, a farmer sharing his last bread with a stranger, a mother walking into the sea so her children might live, a scientist weeping in silence after discovering the atom's power, whispering a prayer for forgiveness. It was too much. He wanted to pull away, but Elion's voice held him still. Do not turn away, Harlan Cole. What you see is the memory of the human soul, the collective heartbeat of your kind. The flood continued. He saw fires rising over ancient cities, yet in their ashes people still held hands. He saw music born from pain, love resurrected in impossible places. He saw empires fall and rebuild, faiths splinter and return, the same light rediscovered through different names. It felt like centuries passing through him in seconds. His mind burned with the enormity of it. I can't. It's too much, he gasped. Elion's voice was steady, though faint. You are feeling what I have felt since your kind first looked to the stars and wondered. Every life is a page in the same story. Every sorrow, every act of mercy, echoes that never fade. Tears blurred Harlan's vision. Why show me this? Because you forgot what eternity looks like when reflected in human eyes. The storm outside howled, rattling the windows in their frames. Elion's body trembled, its outline flickering as though pieces of it were being pulled back into light. Every soul carries eternity within, it whispered, each word vibrating through Harlan's chest. But humanity forgot because fear is easier to control than love. The fire hissed, sparks dancing upward like dying stars. You have been taught to fear your own divinity, Elion continued, to fear death, to fear difference, to fear yourselves. And now that fear is waking again, it rises in your machines, your wars, your endless need to be more than what you already are. It will feed on division until remembrance is erased once more. Harlan felt the words like cold water in his veins. Then tell me how to stop it. Elion's head bowed slightly. You cannot stop fear. You can only refuse to serve it. Speak what you have seen. Tell them that love was the original language of creation, and still is. I'm just one man, Harlan said, his voice breaking. No one will believe me. They'll call me crazy. Perhaps, Elion said softly, but truth has never needed an audience, only a witness. And you have seen. The being's form began to fragment, light seeping through its skin like cracks in glass. The glow pulsed in rhythm with its weakening breath. Harlan reached across the table, grabbing Elion's hand. It was colder now, yet somehow still alive. Don't leave me alone in this, he pleaded. Elion looked up, and for the briefest moment, its eyes were full of the same kindness he had seen in Margaret's. You were never alone. You have never been. You only believed the silence meant absence. It never did. Harlan shook his head, tears spilling freely. What happens when you're gone? Then the voice becomes yours, Elion said simply. Every age chooses a witness. Now it is you. The lights flickered, dimming until only the faint orange of the fire remained. Elion's outline shimmered in and out of existence. Its final words came not as speech, but as warmth moving through him, a breath that wasn't air, but meaning. Remember this: fear builds empires, love builds eternity. When you speak, speak from eternity. Then, as if some invisible tether snapped, Elion's form broke apart into motes of light that drifted upward, scattering into the dark corners of the room. The storm outside roared louder, as though the sky itself was reacting to its departure. Harlan fell back in his chair, gasping, his heart pounding like he'd run a marathon. The air was electric, trembling with unseen current. He stared at the empty space where the being had sat, his mind racing, his soul aching from what it had absorbed. "Elion?" he called, voice trembling. There was no answer, only the wind. But then something faint stirred in the room, a soft, rhythmic hum, low and steady, almost like a heartbeat hidden beneath the sound of the storm. It wasn't coming from the walls or the fire. It was coming from him. He pressed a hand against his chest and felt it. Not his physical pulse, but something deeper, a resonance, as if the echo of the continuum still lived inside him, waiting to be remembered. He closed his eyes, the last image of Elion's gaze burning behind his eyelids. Outside, the wind began to calm, the storm slowly easing into quiet snowfall. The farmhouse returned to stillness, but Harlan knew nothing would ever be the same again. In the silence, he heard the echo of Elion's parting words. "You have seen what they will not believe. Now you must choose to keep silent or to remember and speak." The fire crackled once more, casting his shadow across the wall. And in that flicker of light, Harlan realized that the shadow wasn't his alone. For just a moment, another silhouette shimmered beside it, slender, luminous, fading slowly into the glow. Then it was gone, leaving only the hum within him, steady and eternal, like the heartbeat of something far beyond the storm. The storm had nearly spent itself by dawn. What had once been a furious roar was now a whisper over the fields, the wind moving in long, low sighs. The snow had piled high against the porch steps, muffling the world beneath a cold, white silence. Inside the farmhouse, the fire had burned to embers, its orange glow barely touching the walls. Harlan sat in his chair, staring at the space where Elion had been. The air still shimmered faintly, the way heat does above a flame, but the being itself was no longer visible. Only the memory of its presence hung in the stillness. He could still feel the hum within his chest, that strange pulse that wasn't a heartbeat, but something deeper, older. The words of the night replayed over and over in his mind. You must choose to keep silent or to remember and speak. He wanted to speak, but to whom? Who could possibly understand what had happened within these four walls? Then came the sound of movement, soft, faint, like footsteps dragging through snow. Harlan looked up. Elion stood by the back door, its hand resting against the glass. The being's body flickered like a dying flame, light leaking through cracks that spread slowly across its surface. Its shape was dissolving, becoming transparent in places where the glow shone through like starlight trapped under frost. Harlan stood quickly, heart pounding. You shouldn't be standing. You need to rest. Elion turned its head slightly, and though its face no longer held features in the human sense, Harlan could still feel the calmness of its gaze. There is no rest for what I am, it said softly. Only transition. The current calls me home. What do you mean? I cannot remain in this density. The connection is fading, but before I go, there is one more thing you must witness. Harlan's voice cracked. You're leaving? Elion nodded once. Come, Harlan Cole. Bring me into the snow. The earth remembers what heaven forgets." The words cut through him, strange, yet somehow true. He moved to its side, carefully slipping an arm beneath its shoulder, though it felt weightless, as if holding light itself. Together they stepped out onto the porch. The world beyond was blindingly white, snow glittering beneath the faint blue of early morning. A hush lay over everything, the kind of silence that feels alive. Each step left no footprint where Elyon walked. The snow simply glowed faintly and returned to stillness. They moved slowly toward the open field behind the house. The horizon stretched endless and empty, the sun still hiding below it, its light faint but promised. When they reached the center of the field, Elyon stopped. Its chest was radiant now, threads of light seeping through the cracks like molten silver. Harlan stepped back slightly, shielding his eyes. "Tell me what's happening," he said. "Every form must dissolve to remember itself," Elyon replied. "What you call death is not destruction. It is expansion. When this shell fades, the awareness that inhabits it rejoins the continuum." Harlan shook his head, tears freezing on his lashes. "You don't have to go. Stay. Teach me more. Let me help." The being smiled, not with a mouth, but through presence, a warmth that filled the air around them. "I have taught you all I can. The rest must be remembered through your own kind." It raised its hands slightly, and the light pouring from its body brightened, spilling across the snow in long ribbons. The sky itself seemed to pulse in rhythm, faint auroras shimmering above them, green and violet ripples like breathing light. "In the next age," Elyon said, its voice carrying both sorrow and promise, "your species will not worship gods but frequencies. They will learn that everything, stone, blood, sound, and thought, vibrates with the same divine rhythm. Those who understand the resonance of compassion will open the door between life and afterlife. The bridge will return, and memory will heal what fear has broken." Harlan felt the wind rise, circling them in a slow spiral. Snow lifted in tiny whirlwinds, each flake catching the growing light. "You're talking about the future," he said. "Will I live to see it?" Elyon's glow flickered. "The seeds of remembrance are already sown. You will water them with truth. Others will carry them after you. The cycle does not depend on time. It depends on courage." The light deepened again, and the cracks spreading across Elyon's form widened. Beneath them, there was no flesh, no bone, only brilliance, as though a star had been hiding under skin. The sight was so beautiful it hurt to look at. "Wait," Harlan whispered, stepping forward. "You said you had one more thing for me to witness." Elyon's form trembled, light spilling faster now, streaming into the air like smoke made of starlight. "A gift," it said softly, "a remembrance of love beyond fear." The air between them shimmered, and suddenly Harlan saw her, Margaret. Not as before in the river of light, but standing before him in her old blue winter coat, her hair lifting slightly in the breeze. She looked exactly as she had the last winter they shared together, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes kind and alive. He couldn't move. "Maggie?" She smiled, that same small smile that had once made every hard day bearable. Her lips moved, but the words came not from her mouth, but from inside him, clear, unmistakable. "I never left." Harlan fell to his knees, hands trembling in the snow. "I see you," he whispered. "I see you, my love." Margaret's image glowed brighter for a moment, then gently faded, dissolving back into Elyon's light until only the being remained. The final transformation had begun. Elyon's outline wavered like heat over snow, breaking apart into particles of gold that caught the morning wind. The voice came one last time, now distant, echoing through Harlan's mind like music played across eternity. Remember what I showed you. Tell them love is not a feeling, it is the frequency of creation itself. And then, with a soft sound like the hush before dawn, Elion was gone. The wind swept through the field, carrying the remnants of light into the horizon until nothing remained but falling snow. Harlan knelt there for a long time, breathing hard, his hands buried in the cold. The air was sharp, but not bitter. The spot where Elion had stood still glowed faintly, a perfect circle of warmth melting through the frost. Steam rose gently from it, curling into the air like incense. He reached out and touched the center. The snow there wasn't wet. It was warm, pulsing faintly, alive. He closed his fingers over it and whispered, "Thank you." A soft gust moved through the field, lifting the edges of his coat. In it, he thought he heard a voice, Margaret's again, carried through the wind like song. It was faint, but clear enough to break him open all over again. "You were never alone, Harlan. You only had to listen." He stayed there until the sun rose, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. The circle of warmth never froze again. It remained, a quiet miracle in the heart of the winter field, refusing to yield to the cold. By the time he returned to the house, the sky was clear. The storm was gone. And yet, when he closed the door behind him, he could still feel the hum within his chest, the resonance of something greater than faith, greater than fear. He sat by the dying fire, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the faint light spilling through the window. Somewhere out there, in that circle of snow, he knew a promise still lingered, that love, once remembered, could never truly vanish. The wind sighed softly outside, as if agreeing, and, for the first time since Margaret's death, Harlan didn't feel the silence as emptiness. He felt it as presence, a vast, eternal listening that seemed to whisper back the same words over and over again. "I never left." The days that followed felt endless and hollow, stretched thin like the pale winter light that crept through the frosted windows of Harlan's farmhouse. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the whole world had gone into mourning. Snow covered everything, the fields, the roof, even the broken fence posts, erasing every trace of the footprints he and Elion had left behind. Harlan searched for days. At first, he did it because he needed proof that he hadn't imagined it all, that the light, the voice, the being had been real. He scoured the field from dawn until dusk, digging through drifts and frozen soil until his fingers went numb. But there was nothing. No trace of the ship, no circle of warmth, no sign that anything extraordinary had ever happened there. Even the small patch of melted snow where Elion had vanished had refrozen overnight, sealing itself shut as though the earth had chosen to forget. Neighbors stopped by once or twice, checking on him after the storm. They found him quieter than usual, though polite, and left thinking that grief had finally taken hold. "You've been out here alone too long, Harlan," one of them said gently, before leaving a pie on the porch. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks when it's got no company." Maybe they were right. Maybe loneliness could conjure miracles. Each night, he sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one where Elion had sat, its dark eyes reflecting the flames like twin mirrors to another world. He replayed every word, every image, until the memories blurred into dreams. He would wake in the small hours of morning drenched in sweat, unsure if the humming in his ears was the wind or something else. By the fourth day, the snow began to soften under the rare warmth of sunlight. He went outside less, spent his time instead inside the house, moving through the small routines that once gave his days shape: coffee, wood, dishes, silence. The radio still didn't work. Static filled every station like a voice trying to speak but trapped behind glass. On the sixth night, while wiping down the kitchen table, his rag caught on something sharp. He frowned and leaned closer. At first, he thought it was just a splinter of glass from one of the old lamps, but when he pried it loose, he saw it wasn't ordinary glass at all. It was translucent but not clear, like a frozen tear, faintly curved, no larger than a coin. When he turned it in his fingers, faint streaks of light shimmered within it, like veins of lightning caught mid-strike. The moment his skin made full contact with it, a vibration ran up his arm, soft but unmistakable, like the purr of an unseen engine. He froze. The kitchen light flickered once. Then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the shard began to hum. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. The sound was gentle, harmonic, a resonance that seemed to vibrate somewhere behind his ribs. He brought it closer to his ear. The hum grew clearer, and beneath it, he began to hear something else. Voices, not loud or distinct, but overlapping like wind through leaves, speaking in languages he couldn't recognize. He stood perfectly still. The voices weren't random. They carried rhythm, melody, almost like singing. Yet mixed within them was another sound, softer, clearer, breaking through the chorus like sunlight through fog. It was her voice. Margaret. He felt the breath leave his lungs. "Maggie," he whispered, gripping the shard tighter. The hum deepened, the light inside it flaring from silver to gold. Her voice came again, close now, as if she were standing just behind him. "Death was a doorway," she said gently. "You're standing at it now." Harlan turned around, but the room was empty. His heart pounded in his chest. "I don't understand," he whispered. "What do you mean, a doorway?" There was no reply, only the faint shimmer of her laughter, the kind he hadn't heard in years. It echoed through the room like a ghost of memory, filling every corner with warmth. The shard in his hand pulsed with light, and suddenly images flooded his mind. Not visions exactly, more like memories that didn't belong to him. He saw flashes of places he'd never been, a desert beneath two suns, oceans of liquid light, cities made of sound instead of stone. He saw people, some human, some not, all walking beneath the same invisible thread of radiance connecting them to something vast and unseen. And through it all, he heard Elion's voice, soft and distant, weaving through the noise like a reminder from beyond. Those who understand the resonance of compassion will open the door between life and afterlife. The shard vibrated harder now, its hum rising in pitch. Harlan staggered back, nearly dropping it, but something in him refused to let go. He clutched it close to his chest, trembling as the sound grew louder, not in his ears, but in his mind. He saw the field again, the place where Elion had vanished. Only this time, it wasn't covered in snow. The grass was green, swaying under sunlight, the air shimmering with invisible threads of gold. In the center stood a circle of light, the same spot where the being had dissolved. He saw himself standing there, holding the shard aloft, its glow merging with the sky above. He blinked, and the vision vanished. He was back in his kitchen, heart hammering, breath ragged. The hum softened again, returning to a low vibration that pulsed faintly through the air. He sat down heavily, the shard resting on the table before him. Its glow reflected faintly in his eyes. blue and gold interwoven, like the light of day and night meeting. He knew then what the message meant. Death was a doorway, not a wall. Elyon had crossed it to remind him, and now it was his turn to open it wider, for others who still believed it was locked. He rose from the table slowly, holding the shard in both hands. "You're still here," he whispered. "Both of you." The air seemed to respond, a faint warmth brushing his cheek like a touch. He could almost smell Margaret's perfume, faint as lilacs in early spring. He smiled through tears. "All right," he said softly. "I'll finish what you started." He walked to the window, staring out at the pale horizon. The snow was glowing faintly under the moonlight, the same hue as the shard in his palm. The sky stretched clear and endless, filled with the quiet hum of the world still turning. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. He pressed the shard to his chest and closed his eyes. The hum deepened again, resonating with his heartbeat until the two sounds became one. In that merging, he felt them both, Margaret and Elyon, woven together in the same current of light that now flowed through him. When he opened his eyes, the horizon seemed brighter. Not daybreak, not yet, but the promise of it. He looked down at the shard, its glow steady, unwavering. "You were right," he said softly to the quiet room. "It was never about faith. It was about remembering." And in that moment, as the snow fell quietly outside, Harlan Cole, the man who had once lost everything, knew exactly what he had to do. He would go back to the field. He would stand where Elyon vanished, hold the shard to the sky, and let the world hear the sound it had forgotten. The hum in his chest swelled, and with it came a peace so deep it felt like the world exhaling. Outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of his wife's voice, soft, steady, eternal. "You're standing at the doorway, Harlan. It's time to open it." The following morning broke with the brittle quiet of deep winter. A pale light seeped through the curtains, turning the frost on the window panes into rivers of silver. Harlan hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table with the shard of glass still in his hands, its faint hum now steady, a low heartbeat against his skin. He knew what it wanted, or maybe what he wanted. The knowing had settled in him during the night, soft but unshakable. The message was not meant to die with him. He cleaned himself up, shaved for the first time in days, and put on the same brown coat Margaret had once patched near the cuff. Then he tucked the shard safely into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and stepped out into the cold. The snow had hardened overnight, crunching beneath his boots as he walked to his truck. The engine coughed before catching, filling the still air with a familiar, comforting rumble. The drive into town was long and lonely. The fields stretched white and endless on either side of the road, and the radio still only played static. But beneath that static, if he listened closely, he thought he could hear faint harmonic tones, almost music, subtle and trembling, like the hum of the shard translated through the world. When he reached town, the streets were quiet. It was Sunday morning, and most people were already in church. He passed the steeple on Main Street, hearing the muffled rise and fall of hymns carried on the cold air. He wondered if they'd ever sing about what he was about to tell them, or if they'd simply call it blasphemy. He didn't stop. He drove past the church, past the diner, past the gas station with its flickering neon sign, until he reached the small community center on the edge of town. The building was old and drafty, used mostly for bingo nights and town meetings. The caretaker, an old man with a knit cap and a coffee thermos, didn't ask many questions when Harlan rented it for the afternoon. He just handed him the keys and said, "Lock up when you're done." Inside, the hall was dim and cold. Rows of metal chairs faced a small wooden stage. Harlan turned on the lights, humming fluorescents that buzzed like tired insects, and set up the small camera he'd borrowed years ago to record fishing trips. It took him several tries to get it working. When the red light finally blinked on, he exhaled slowly and sat down on the stage, the shard glowing faintly in his pocket. He stared into the lens for a long time before speaking. "My name is Harlan Cole," he said quietly. "I'm 61 years old. I live outside of Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a prophet. I'm just a man who's seen something I can't keep to myself anymore." His voice echoed in the empty hall. He hesitated, then continued. "A week ago, I shared my dinner with a starving being that wasn't from this world. I don't expect you to believe that. Hell, if someone told me the same thing, I wouldn't either. But it happened. And what that being showed me changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what waits after." He paused, the memory flooding back, the firelight, Elion's dark eyes, the hum of eternity behind every word. "It told me that heaven isn't a place. It's not somewhere we go after we die. It's a state of remembrance, remembering what we really are. Every soul, every life, is a thread in the same light. We don't end. We just change density." His hand shook as he spoke. He wasn't trying to perform, wasn't preaching. He was simply remembering aloud. I was shown what it called the continuum. I saw souls moving like rivers of light, all connected, all learning through love and through loss. There was no judgment there, no punishment, no damnation, just growth. He swallowed, his throat tight. The being's name was Elion. It came not to convert or conquer, but to remind. It said humanity has forgotten how to listen, that fear has drowned out the sound of compassion, and that the time has come to remember again. He reached into his pocket and held the shard up to the camera. It glowed faintly even under the harsh lights, casting a warm circle on the wall behind him. This is what it left behind. I don't know what it is. All I know is that when I hold it, I can hear voices, not the kind that make you crazy, but the kind that remind you that love never dies. I hear my wife's voice. She tells me she never left. For a moment, his composure broke. His eyes filled with tears. You can think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. But I'd rather lose it believing in love than keep it locked inside fear. He ended the recording there. No theatrics, no prophecy, just silence. Then he sat in the empty hall for a while, listening to the faint hum in the walls, wondering if Elion was still somewhere within that sound. That evening, he uploaded the video to the internet using his old computer. The process was slow. The connection stuttered, the progress bar froze, and he nearly gave up twice. When it finally went live, he titled it simply, "The Message for the Living." He didn't expect anyone to watch, but within hours, they did. Some laughed in the comments, calling him a liar, a crank, a man who had finally gone mad with grief. Others called him a heretic. A few claimed he was possessed or working with demons. But buried among the noise were quiet messages, small, trembling voices from people scattered across the world. One wrote, "I lost my husband last year. When you said love changes density, I felt him in the room again." Another said, "My daughter died last spring. I heard her humming the same tone you played from that shard. Thank you for reminding me she's still here." And one, simply, "I believe you. Not because I know, but because I remember." Harlan read them all with a trembling hand. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The hum in his chest grew stronger, resonating with something beyond himself. He felt it moving, spreading. Within days, others began sharing the video. Some reposted it as a curiosity, others as evidence of delusion, but it didn't matter. The message had slipped through. People began to hear the hum. Churches debated it. Scientists tried to analyze the frequency in the recording, claiming it matched no known sound. Psychologists dismissed it as mass suggestion. But still, people kept listening, not with their ears, but with something deeper. In the quiet corners of bedrooms, in hospitals and hospice wards, in kitchens lit only by phone screens, they whispered the same phrase Harlan had spoken. Heaven was never a place. It was remembrance. He didn't know how far it would go, or how long it would last, but he knew it had begun. The few who understood would carry it forward, each in their own way, a secret light moving quietly from heart to heart. One night, weeks later, Harlan sat on his porch beneath a clear sky. The stars shimmered like living things, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the shard's glow. He smiled to himself, the cold air filling his lungs. Somewhere out there, people were remembering. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he heard her voice again. Margaret, soft and near. "You did it, Harlan." He opened his eyes and whispered into the night, "No, we did." And in the stillness that followed, the stars seemed to hum in agreement, their light spreading outward like the quiet pulse of eternity, awakening once more. The years that followed passed softly, like snow melting on the edge of spring. The world had changed since that winter night in Wyoming. The video he once recorded, the quiet confession of an old man who claimed to have dined with an alien, had spread farther than he'd ever imagined. For a while, it was everywhere, shared, mocked, debated, and dissected. Then it faded into the background noise of endless new stories, as all things do. But for some, it had never left. Those few who felt its truth kept it alive, passing it from one person to another like a whispered prayer, a melody you can't quite forget. They called it the remembrance. It wasn't a religion, not really, more like a quiet movement of souls learning to listen again. They met in living rooms, under stars, in hospitals, and at gravesides, speaking softly of the continuum, of compassion, of the hum that united all things. They didn't pray to a God above them. They remembered the divine within them. Harlan never took credit for any of it. He lived quietly, just as he always had, in the same creaking farmhouse surrounded by fields that shimmered golden every summer and silver every winter. The truck rusted, the barn collapsed one spring under the weight of snow, but he didn't mind. His body slowed, his hands grew unsteady, but the hum never left. It lived within him now, constant, steady, comforting. Sometimes letters would come from faraway places. People who had watched his old video years ago still wrote to him. A mother from Norway, a nurse from India, a miner from Chile. Each one said the same thing in their own way. "Your story helped me stop fearing death." He never responded to most of them. He didn't have to. He would sit by the window, holding each letter close to his chest before setting it aside, whispering a quiet thank you to the unseen current that had carried his message farther than any voice could travel. As he aged, solitude returned, but it was no longer loneliness. It was peace. He ate simple meals, mostly soup and bread, and spent his evenings near the fire with a notebook full of small, uneven handwriting. He didn't write about what he'd seen anymore. Instead, he wrote about what he'd felt. The taste of stillness, the weight of grace, the lightness of being unafraid. Neighbors checked in sometimes, bringing groceries or splitting wood for him. They'd find him sitting on the porch, wrapped in his old coat, smiling at nothing in particular. "You doing all right, Harlan?" they'd ask. He'd nod. Better than ever. He didn't tell them that he could sometimes see faint flickers of light moving through the trees at dusk, like fireflies that never blinked out. He didn't tell them that every night, just before sleep, he could hear Margaret humming softly from the other room. He didn't tell them that the shard still glowed faintly on his bedside table, steady as a heartbeat. Then, one evening, as autumn turned the fields to bronze and the air grew thin with cold, his body began to fail. It was quiet. No pain, no fear. Just a deep, slow surrender. He sat at the kitchen table one last time, eating his small dinner of soup and bread. The spoon trembled slightly in his hand, but he didn't spill. The fire beside him crackled lazily. Outside, the wind whispered through the fields. When he finished eating, he sat back, hands resting in his lap. The clock on the wall ticked its steady rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, the hum rose again, gentle, familiar. Then came the sound, a knock, soft, faint, like the one that had started it all those years ago. He froze, breath caught halfway in his chest. The house was dark except for the firelight. The knock came again, gentle, patient. Harlan pushed himself up from the chair, each step slow but sure. The old floorboards groaned beneath his feet as he crossed the kitchen. His hand found the doorknob. He hesitated only a moment, smiling to himself. "You took your time," he whispered. He opened the door. A flood of golden light poured in, warm and clean, chasing every shadow from the room. It didn't blind him. It felt like sunlight through closed eyes, like the first breath after a long sleep. Standing in that light was Elion, radiant, whole, no longer frail or fading. Its form was brilliant, woven of countless threads of color and motion. Its eyes shimmered like galaxies, deep and alive. Harlan laughed softly, a breath caught between awe and relief. "You kept your promise." Elion smiled, and though no words passed its lips, the message filled the air like a song. "Are you ready to come home?" Harlan nodded, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. "I've been ready for a long time." The light deepened, wrapping around him like a blanket. He could feel the warmth spreading through his bones, gentle and kind. The hum in his chest merged with it, becoming one sound, one pulse. For a heartbeat, he thought he could hear every soul he had ever loved. Margaret, his parents, the voices of the ones he'd saved as a paramedic, even the strangers who had written him letters. They weren't gone. They were here, woven into the radiance filling the room. He turned his head slightly toward the fire. The flames flickered once, as if bowing. Elion stepped closer, the light touching Harlan's face, erasing every line of age, every scar of sorrow. "You remembered," it said gently. He smiled faintly. "You made sure of it." Outside, the wind had stopped entirely. The night was utterly still. Harlan took one last breath, steady and full, and as it left him, the light grew brighter. The hum swelled until it filled every corner of the house. The walls, the table, the floor, everything seemed to vibrate with the same sacred rhythm. And then, there was no more separation. The farmhouse vanished into silence. The light faded slowly, leaving behind only warmth, a presence, not a trace. The fire burned steady, and the clock on the wall stilled its ticking, as if pausing in reverence. On the kitchen table, the shard of glass pulsed one final time, glowing from within like a captured sunrise. Then it dissolved into air, into the same radiance that had carried Elion home. When the neighbors came by the next morning, They found the front door slightly open, the fire still crackling softly. Harlan sat in his chair by the table, head bowed slightly forward, a faint smile on his lips. The room was warm, impossibly warm for winter. They never understood how. But those who entered swore that for a moment, as the light touched their faces, they heard something, a quiet hum, like the memory of a voice saying, "It wasn't heaven after all. It was us remembering what heaven always was." And then there was only silence, the kind that feels holy, the kind that lingers long after the sound is gone.